In this video, I'm going to talk about the rising sun and the setting sun. I aim to show that if the sun was actually 93 million miles away, it would not appear like this with its edges so well defined. As the distance from the observer increases, a haze seems to appear over all the land features. This photograph demonstrates this particular phenomenon again. And we see this again in this photograph. As you can see, this is quite a clear day, but yet if we look in the background, we can see that there is a haze forming in the distance. And again, we see a similar situation here. As you move further from the observer, the haze increases, and this is due to the opacity of the atmosphere. This photograph again shows a very similar thing. It's quite a clear day, but if we look into the distance, we can see the opacity of the atmosphere having an effect and creating a haze over the mountains. In fact, the mountains look like they are melding in with the sky. Again, we can see a very similar situation here. If we look into the distance, it becomes very difficult to tell where the sky starts and the land ends, or vice versa. Even when we look from an aeroplane out to the horizon, we see that the horizon is not very well defined, and this is again due to the opacity of the atmosphere. It's difficult to tell where the sky ends and the sea begins, or where the sea ends and the sky begins. So there's another one here. Again, when viewed from an aeroplane, you still have the same issue with the opacity of the atmosphere. This figure shows the various layers of atmosphere, and the stratosphere is the thickest layer. The stratosphere extends 50 kilometers above the Earth, and the upper atmosphere ends at 350 kilometers. I actually created a CAD model of the Earth and the atmosphere. Basically, I have three circles. The innermost circle represents the Earth, the outermost circle represents the limits to the outer atmosphere, and the circle that lies in between the two represents the stratosphere. This line here represents where the sun lies. So if we continue along this line and travel 93 million miles in this direction, we will eventually come to the sun. If we have an observer standing here looking towards the sun, then this line represents his line of sight. This model was actually created using free CAD software called QCAD, and it's available for download on the internet. This is a zoomed out view of the CAD model that I created. This is the Earth, this is the line of the sun, and this is the line of sight of the observer who is standing at the terminator. Eventually, these two lines do meet. Here I have zoomed in to the CAD model. Basically, this outer arc represents the limits of the outer atmosphere. The inner arc represents the surface of the Earth, and this arc here represents the stratosphere. So the stratosphere is 50 kilometers above the Earth, and the limits to the outer atmosphere is 350 kilometers above the Earth. This is where the observer stands on the surface of the Earth at the terminator line, and this represents his line of sight. As you can see, his line of sight has to travel, or has to go through 799 kilometers of stratosphere in order to see the setting sun. And 799 kilometers is the same as 496 miles. Here I have zoomed in a little bit further. So the observer stands here and he's looking out towards the sun, and he has to look through all this stratosphere and then all this upper atmosphere in order to be able to see the sun. As I have shown earlier, it is not possible to look too far into the distance before the opacity of the atmosphere begins to restrict your view. Here I'm going to do a quick review regarding perspective. I'm not going to go into too much detail because other YouTube users have already done this, and I recommend Stinky, Cash or P-Brain. They both have done exceptional analyses on perspective. So basically here we have the camera looking down a walkway. There's a clock here and there is also a clock here. Both these clocks are actually at the same altitude, but because of perspective, the second clock appears to be much closer to the ground. If this walkway was longer and there were more clocks along the ceiling, some of these clocks would not appear at all because they would be hidden by the horizon line. If we return to the CAD model, we can see that the red arrow represents how much atmosphere the observer has to look through in order to see a sun that is 93 million miles away. But if we assume that the sun maintains its altitude all the time, and the reason it appears to set is due to perspective, then we can see that the observer does not have to look through very much atmosphere at all. Again, returning to this particular photograph, we can see that the atmosphere has a significant effect at a very small distance. Now, returning to the photograph showing perspective, we can see that sometimes there may be some level of atmospheric distortion that is quite close to us. This means that everything behind the atmospheric distortion may well be hidden. This includes inferior mirages and such like. Now, if the sun is travelling away from us without reducing altitude, eventually it will disappear behind either the atmospheric distortion or the horizon line. Revisiting this model, again we can see that the Sun would not appear like this with its edges so well defined if we had to look through 500 miles of atmosphere to see it. If, however, the Sun maintains its altitude and simply moves away from us, then we do not have to see, or we do not have to look through as much atmosphere, and then the Sun would actually appear the way it does appear to us.